When ruling a realm so large, evoking awe often trumps efficiency.
Nevertheless, one wouldn't want to misinterpret them as an overcompensation for weakness.
The first episode in Foundation Season 2 takes us across the galaxy to catch up with all the characters 138 years after the events of Season 1. Since there's a time jump and each story is somewhat unconnected right now, I'm going to do a brief recap of how we got here and then hit on each of the main characters. So don't worry, I will be getting back around to the nudely paced fight scene. As the title suggests, this is life in Selden's shadow. We see how things have developed since Harry declared that psychohistory had determined that the Galactic Empire would fall, and that would lead to a dark age lasting for tens of thousands of years. As you might imagine, this isn't the kind of news that the people in charge wanted to hear. So Harry got himself and a small group of his followers exiled to Terminus. He died along the way, but his plan to create the Foundation to help usher in the new empire and considerably shorten the Dark Age after the fall was already in place. For his plan to work, he had to keep most of the details to himself, because psychohistory requires that the population remain largely ignorant of its predictions and analyses, because if they knew what was supposed to happen, they might change their behaviors. Fast forward to the end of Season 1, and while things didn't play out precisely as Harry had planned, the Foundation did survive on Terminus, and were able to navigate the first of a series of predicted crises. And on Trantor, cracks started to show in the Empire's all-powerful facade. What went wrong was mostly related to Gaal Dornick, who Harry had chosen to be a key figure on Terminus, based on her being the only other person who understood psychohistory's equations. On the trip, she fell in love with Harry's adopted son, Raich, who had to change his role in the plan to protect her after she witnessed him murdering Selden. When she took his place in a rendezvous with Harry's consciousness on the Raven, she became increasingly frustrated with his withholding information, and he became worried that she was an outlier that could throw things off based on her visions of future events. Rather than following what he wanted and taking him to his home planet Helicon to start the Second Foundation, she leaves the ship behind to be destroyed and travels to her home planet Synnax. In the closing minutes of the first season, she meets her biological daughter Salvor Hardin there for the first time after they both wake up from a period of cryosleep. And that's where Season 2 picks up. While Gaal slept, it looks like Harry's consciousness might have spent its time awake in the data storage device in the handle of Rach's knife. The episode opens with him alone there, losing his mind, and then we see him get transferred into the Prime Radiant, which Salvor brought to Gaal. The conversation between them picks up where it left off after Salvor explained that she was Gaal's daughter. Her perceived connection with the Vault on Terminus had led her and others to believe that she was special, and finding out that that wasn't the case in the finale put her on this path. She's basically hoping that meeting her biological mother will help her understand her own feelings about being an outlier. But at this point, Gaal isn't sure what to do with any of this because she's still angry about what happened with Harry and Rach. Salvor left everything behind, hoping that the feeling of being drawn to this planet was something that was connecting her to Gaal. But when she throws that out there, Gaal can't say that she feels the same way. And that pretty much defines their relationship for the time being. They're stuck on a dying planet, they know what Harry's predictions are, and when she finally looks at the Prime Radiant, Gaal sees that the next crisis is coming, and things only get worse after that. Their coming together might not have been what Salvor was hoping for, but they do share that everyone they've known is behind them. So in the short term, they work together to raise the beggar, and they agree to play it by ear for the long term. There is a storm coming, and being underwater has damaged the beggar to the point that they can't leave the planet. Salvor pleads with Gaal to let Harry help, and she isn't getting anywhere until he manifests at the end of the episode. There are several scenes that take place inside the Radiant that lead up to this, most of which involve him figuring out where he is and trying to get out. We get some hints about his past with a flashback to his childhood, and then meet a woman named Yana who was the love of his life and apparently helped him develop the Radiant. There's a great back and forth where he says she can't be there because she's dead, and she points out that he is too. Ultimately, he wants to believe she's real, but the way she's talking throws him off, and when he calls her out, the vision changes to be the mathematician Calais, whose ninth proof of folding is what Gaal used to solve the Abraxas conjecture. From their conversation, you get the sense that he sees these people because they were important in developing psychohistory and the Prime Radiant, but it also seems like there might be something else going on. When he figures out that he needs to reduce the dimensions to project himself so that Gaal sees him at the end, Callie tells him that she can explain more if he can meet her somewhere on the outside, which makes it seem like this is something that will continue in the coming episodes. We don't see a lot of Foundation or Terminus in this episode, but we learn they've been flourishing since Salvor left. A flourishing Foundation poses a threat to Empire, so it's only a matter of time until things will come to a head. For the past 138 years, the plan to use the Invictus to stage a mega flare to make it look like all the life in the system was destroyed worked. Because they had also just found out about the Genetic Dynasty being corrupted, they never did a thorough investigation. The truth comes to light when Commander Craig Dorwin's body is recovered after floating in space for over a century. As Demerzel brings this information to the Cleons, we get filled in on a lot of the details. She believes what we know to be true, that the Foundation isn't hiding out of desperation. She explains they managed to get a jump ship in the Invictus, and there have been several reports of an alliance at the edge of the galaxy led by magicians who glow in the darkness and fly unaided through the air, and she says weapons can't touch them. They speak of a galactic spirit that will return and guide his people to a promised new age, which sounds like Selden, and causes Empire to understand that the Foundation didn't wither away. From the overhead shot we see, it looks like it's done the opposite. The colony looks robust, and we meet the current warden and some of the other new characters. Alarms sound as the vault is about to open for the first time since the other version of Harry's consciousness appeared in the Season 1 finale. That should mean that the second crisis is upon them, and the one thing that stands out about the new characters we see is that they all seem to be focused on war. This is in contrast to the way Demerzel described the alliance that was forming on the periphery. The new warden doesn't look like he dabbles in magic, and we don't see him flying around, so I suppose we'll have to wait and see what's going on there. On Trantor, the current Brother Day, Cleon the 17th, is engaged in full-on sexual intercourse with Demerzel. This isn't something we've seen before. We have seen that Demerzel serves to fill different roles for the Cleons throughout their life cycle. She starts out as a nanny, their teacher, and as a mother figure. Then she becomes an advisor, and that's where there were some hints that it might go deeper than that, but nothing had transpired on screen. In one of the official podcast episodes for Season 1, showrunner David S. Goyer said it was implied that they might have sexual relation as the clone becomes Day, and the fact that he brought that up made me think that this was likely coming. Is it weird? I mean, the context is that this is a robot who is currently presenting as a female that has been alive for thousands of years. She's instrumental in keeping the Genetic Dynasty functioning, and because she has their complete trust based on her connection to Cleon the First, she's really the only being that could do what she does. I suppose the better question than is it weird or does it make sense is just a plain why. What does this accomplish for her character? I do think this confirms that this is something that started with Cleon the First, which Brother Day mentions a little bit later, and that shifts my focus and makes me wonder more about their relationship and the genesis of the dynasty, which is something we'll come back to at the end of the video. While they're together, a group of assassins break into his chambers and almost kill a very nude Day, who manages to fight them off with the help of Demerzel, who had half of her head chopped off in the process. They were able to compromise his aura, so he does get injured, and they have to act fast to save him. There is a lot going on here, and I imagine most of the conversation will be about the act they were engaged in when things popped off, and the nudity involved in this carefully choreographed violence. But it also introduces some important details about the character. Remember, Day is Cleon the 17th here, which means Dusk is the 16th. Season 1 focused primarily on 12 and 13, and ended with Demerzel killing the version of Dawn who would have become Cleon the 14th. This was when they learned the genetic material was compromised, and now 3 cycles have occurred between seasons. So for our purposes, these are completely new Cleons that are no longer the same man because of that compromised genetic material. This seems to be an important point they'll be exploring this season, and I think all 3 actors do a great job of showing some of those differences in their personalities coming out. Of course, I should say that there were always some differences in the clones and the way they develop, but I'm expecting that we might see something more pronounced going forward. Most of that is related to what we see Lee Pace doing in this episode. It stood out to me that he seemed to relish the actual violence, the fighting in the assassination scene, and that he went to Demerzel directly to ask if what they were doing was indecent, while sort of ignoring Dusk when he brought the same thing up. He also shows that his individuality is important to him when he has this fear of them decanting another version after the attack. This and several other small details, including his paranoia of everyone around him as the investigation gets underway, add up to his being a brand new character in that same body and sets up the introduction of Queen Sareth from Cloud Dominion, who, as the other major new character we get introduced to in the premiere, pretty quickly establishes herself as a woman who might just be up to the task of giving this new, bold, and brash Cleon exactly what he gives. Before she arrives, we get some insights into why she's there, and why Day is taking a wife and trying to have an heir in the first place. He talks to Dawn in his chambers, telling him that he knew fear, and stresses that he feels like a singular soul. Dawn tells him that having children won't make him immortal, it will do the opposite. His heirs would eventually replace him, and the Genetic Dynasty would end there. Of course, he's next in line and would lose his chance to rule, so he has his own reasons to oppose the upcoming marriage. But when Day says that he's going to have their memory scanned because he thinks they are possibly involved in what happened, you kind of see how this new dynamic causes problems. There's more of that in the scene where Sareth and her entourage arrive. On her end, we see that she has an agenda when her aide Rue says that Empire is right to be afraid of her. Dusk puts his own spin on what Dawn was saying earlier after he tells Day to stop banging the robot that changed his diapers. He casts some suspicion on Sareth because of the timing of the attack, and brings up that there are rumors that she engineered the accident that put the crown on her head, but also points out that it would be much wiser to wait until after they were married if she was going to try to kill him. The bottom line here is that there is tension between the Cleons, and Day's plan to marry isn't supported by those closest to him. And his bride-to-be, Sareth, doesn't do much to win them over, which makes it entertaining to watch her push Day's buttons as she's unimpressed with his gift of a miniature Trantor cast in brass. She uses that as a way to bring up the fact that the Empire is in decline. And it's not exactly clear what her motivations are at this point, but the fact that she's willing to test Empire in this way makes her a compelling character to watch right from the start. Demerzel comes into the throne room to interrupt their introductions and fill them in on the new information about the Foundation. In response to that, Dusk is in favor of wiping them out and asking questions later, but Demerzel counsels restraint and a full investigation. Day sides with her, saying that they need to find out how far the rot has spread, and in response, Dusk urges him to get his house in order. Overall, this was a really great start to a new season. Everything that was good about the first season is just as good here or better. The sets and the effects still look great. The new rings around Trantor are as visually pleasing as the Star Bridge was. Demerzel sitting in front of her mirror doing repairs with half a head makes for a great shot. And I'm coming around on some of the style choices like the design of Sareth's ship. And things I didn't like as much seem to have been improved on. They seem to be aware of what worked and what didn't, and at least in this episode, they seem to be leaning into the right things. In the big picture, the Foundation has managed to nibble away some planets from the edges of Empire, and Empire is steadily contracting. The altered genome has introduced room for variety that creates tension, and Sareth seems like a good way to stress relations between the Cleons. I suppose we've always known that the Empire will eventually fail, but based on fan reactions, I've wondered at times how the show might go on after the Cleons were no longer there to play opposite of the Foundation. Like a lot of people, and as someone who was a fan of the books, I was surprised to favor the Empire storyline over what was developing on Terminus in Season 1. Gaal and Salvor being together doesn't instantly cancel all of that out, but it does seem like there's some potential there. Even though I imagine Harry's consciousness will play a larger role in this part of the story going forward, these two are completely removed from the lives they were born into, and with their outlier traits are set up to complement each other well. At the same time, Gaal's reluctance to step right into a mother role makes sense, and you can also appreciate why Salvor would need that to happen, and how that leads to her almost being overeager for it. The Harry stuff feels a little disconnected from everything else. I am curious to learn more about his history and how being trapped for all that time affected him. Beyond that, it's a little too early to understand how that ties in with the plan or where his story is going this season. The Cleons and their decline is still mostly what makes this episode cook. It also feels like the tensions between them is a good way to bring Demerzel out of the shadows a bit. The way she killed Dawn and then went back to her room to tear off her face at the end of last season is all saying something. It's saying there's a lot more going on there than what we've seen, and I hope we learn more about that ASAP. The idea of creating an heir, having an individual legacy for Cleon the 17th, does make you wonder how that solves their problems. And then I guess how that would solve Demerzel's problems. I mentioned her connection to Cleon the First, her role in setting up the Genetic Dynasty, and the way that we've seen that she's dedicated to making sure that continues. Only now that isn't possible. So I wonder how this all fits into what she's trying to do as far as making sure that Empire continues. There are a lot of interesting things in the mix here. Gaal's dream of what looks like a destroyed future with the appearance of this character who we saw a little more of in the teasers and trailers. Plus, it's funny that Salvor is older than her mother because of their different periods of cryosleep. And there are two versions of Harry out there that are independent of each other as far as we know. It'll be interesting to see what happens when the other one comes out of the vault on Terminus. And what this one will do, the one that I expect will be with Gaal and Salvor. Yana Selden is brand new and doesn't appear to be a stand-in for Harry's wife Dors from the prequel books, which is all I'll say because of spoilers. Then there is this Callie character, or are we supposed to believe that this is the Radiant itself becoming a character? I can't really guess where that's going, but it seems certain that we'll see her again. The assassination attempt feels a little suspicious, and the second time I watched the scene, it really stood out to me how Demerzel urges him to open his eyes at the exact moment they were entering the room. It could just be how they edited things, but I'm wondering if other people thought that this was something that we were supposed to pick up on. Sareth clearly has ulterior motives that it doesn't seem like the Cleons are onto. I really liked how they used her to point out the ways that the dynasty is trying to project strength to cover up its diminished power. As far as book to show stuff, I think we're pretty firmly in this is a remix of Foundation rather than a strict adaptation territory, but you can still see where they rely on some of Asimov's ideas to guide them. The mention of the galactic spirit jumps out here, and everything Gaal and Salvor are doing hints at how they'll be connecting some of the dots. And we also know that Hober Mallow and Bel Rios will be showing up in future episodes. In Selden's Shadow is a promising start. I'm looking forward to seeing what will happen next, and I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.